because we have a very exciting event today. So I'm just going to cop us through it. Yay. Hi, Rob. Who else is here? Hi, Jacqueline. Hi, Emily, Devon, Glenn. Oh, I see some new faces. Hi, Deborah. Hi, Eclipse. Kestrel. Hi. Hi, Lucy. Suzanne's here. Melanie. Wow, we got a great crowd. Lee, Ben. Whew, Kate, look at everybody with their cameras on today. Sherry, fantastic. Steve, I love to see that. It makes people who are talking feel much more um, kind of welcome when we can actually see out. When you're looking out at a blank screen, it's harder. It's just not as fun. So we are recording today. So, don't panic if you miss something. We'll post it in the community. I'm just going to wait a few seconds while we admit. It takes a minute to admit this many people, so we're just going to let it roll so everybody gets in before we start. See, we've got, okay, now where's my chat? Let's bring that up. We all know why I want to bring up the chat. Linda O'Donnell, kindness is the word. Hello, Lisa Troy. It's always nice to see you here. Everybody knows in the Fictionary community, the most important attribute of all of us is kindness, because I believe that really makes creativity grow. And that's what we want, is awesome stories. Okay, so.
With some mean characters.
With mean characters, yes, Christina, we have mean characters. They must be terrible. And we've been talking about Fourth Wing and how mean Jack Barlow is in Fourth Wing. And anyone who's been on those calls knows who I'm talking about. He's not kind at all. Okay, I'm just going to mute my chat. So there's so much going on here. So Christina, when we get into it, I'm going to intro Christina and Jess, and they are from Authors Helping Writers. Nope, that's not
Agents Helping Writers.
Agents Helping Writers. I knew that. Agents Helping Writers. Christina's also hosting a fabulous conference next week, and the Storytellers Summit, and it's free. Everybody here has access. I'll put the link over in the chat in a bit, but tremendous opportunity to learn from agents who are very interested in coaching people as well. So for Christina, she is the CEO and founder, awesome, of Agents Helping Writers. She's got 15 years experience in the field of creativity coaching, and she's earned a reputation as a trusted mentor, guide, and catalyst for creative growth. She's got a diverse background on creative writing, adult education, project management. So she brings a really unique blend, and she created this company because she really wants to help writers. She's been through it herself. She has her own agent. She knows what this is. And so she decided she wanted to give back and help writers working with agents. And lucky for us, she brought Jess Trudel with us here today as well. And I've lost you. There you are. So Jess, literary agent with the Rights Factory, who spent 15 years prior to that freelance editor and storytelling instructor. And the Rights Factory is a Canadian agency. I think Vancouver. Is it Vancouver, Jess?
Toronto. Well, we have offices in other areas, but our main office is Toronto.
Is Toronto. Okay, fantastic. She's taught workshops to thousands of people. So here we are. We get her today. She's been a guest presenter on many things: SCBWI, 12 by 12 Picture Book Challenge, Write for Kids, very nice. And here's a long one, TSNOTYAW podcast. And she's going to explain what that is in a minute. And has contributed to Boldface Children's Books Insider. So you can see what her interest is. And she founded the writing community.ca. So you can see that we have some high achievers here. We have people who love writers, which of course that's part of our thing. So part of the reason we're so excited to have them here. So Christina, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you say whatever else I didn't say about you that you would like to say.
Well, first, I won't keep people in suspense. That incredibly long acronym that Jess was on is the Shit No One Tells You About Writing podcast. It's a great podcast. If you've listened to it, if you haven't, definitely check it out. It's hosted by two literary agents. Oh God, Carly Waters and I want to say Lila something. Cece Lyra. There we go. It's like I knew it was coming to me. It's a great podcast. So I'm Christina. I run Agents Helping Writers. We're fully virtual, kind of like Fictionary, and I'm so grateful to Christina and company for hosting us today. So excited to meet more writers and more communities. Love another Canadian business, and happy to help. So basically, we're all about providing personalized and honest and supportive feedback, but from an agent's perspective. So, kind of once you've done all the writing and the drafting and the revising on your own, you may have had other helpers along the way. This is now moving from that stage to wanting to be traditionally published and making sure that your manuscript is meeting that industry standard when you go out to query so you don't get rejected over and over and over, as I have experienced in the past. So we do one-on-one book coaching. We have group coaching sessions. Jess is actually going to be leading one starting October 9th. So if you're a young adult writer, middle grade writer, kids lit, she is your expert woman in that area. She knows all the ins and outs. I just saw in Publishers Marketplace a 4-book deal for one of her clients last week. So amazing, especially because that particular space is hard to sell in lately, and that is so amazing, Jess. We've got lots of workshops and events. We've got our summit happening next week, so please check it out. It's 5 days with 19 speakers. Totally free, totally fun, some live events during that as well, but everything else is pre-recorded so you can watch it on your own time. I always get frustrated when something is going to happen at 2 p.m. and I'm like, I'm working. I can't go. So I love when things are pre-recorded or at least recorded for later. October 23rd, we have our oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I just put the link up. So anyone who hasn't signed up, you can sign up right now. It's just there in the chat.
Perfect. Totally free and totally fun. October 23rd, we are launching our boot camp, our character boot camp. So it's self-paced with some live support, but this is about taking your character to that next level. So beyond motivation, beyond goals, beyond positive traits, all that kind of fun stuff. And taking that character to that publishable quality, what's missing to make them, leap off that page and make people remember them after they've set the book down and they're like, God, I feel like character X was a real person. I could have coffee with them. So we have that. We have a plot perfect coming in November, which again is taking your plot through line to that next level, complicating it with subplots and all the intricacies and character arcs and how do you layer everything together to be magical. And we've got some webinars coming up. But before we do Q&A, I thought I'd give you 5 what I think are great tips for writing that hopefully you will as well. One of which is strangely to say more with less in dialogue, of all things. So you may have noticed that some of the most powerful moments in stories come from what's not said. So instead of spelling everything out, you can let your characters' body language, the pauses, the actions they take do some of the talking. Think about if you're having, an argument with your spouse or something, and they say something, and you just decide to really scrub that plate before you say something. That is saying something without actually having to put dialogue in. So all of that is language that can add so much depth and tension to your scene between and add more your character. Inconsistent. Here's the thing: real people are full of contradictions, so your characters should be as well. So maybe your tough as nails protagonist is secretly in love with cheesy romance novels, and that's like they're kind of like that song you never want to tell everyone that you totally love because it doesn't fit your outward persona. Or you could make your always honest best friend tell a lie when it really matters. So some of these small little twists on your characters can make them feel more human and keep readers on their toes. Makes your character a little not unpredictable, but a little bit like, ooh, what choice are they going to make in this situation? Because they're very much honest, but we know that they've lied a couple of times. Number 3 is to play with perception using unreliable senses. So we all know the show don't tell rule. We all know the use your 5 senses rule for description. But You can think
Christina, I think we're
the
having a bit of trouble with your
character's
audio.
emotional state things. Is that a shadow in the corner? Oh, I'm
Can you
so
hear
sorry.
me,
Is it
Christina?
blinking out?
Yeah, your voice is coming in
Is
and
it
out for some reason.
yeah?
Maybe turning off the people's
Oh,
videos
sorry
might
about
actually
that.
do something.
Is this better? Oh, maybe I have to do that. If I knew how to do that. Should I turn my video off?
No, keep your video. If you go at the top, you should just be able to see speaker only
Ah, there we go.
and see if that helps.
Um, there we
Now you
go.
sound
Is
pretty
that
good.
better? Oh,
Yeah,
okay. Well, hopefully. I can also post these in the chat after as well, if that's helpful for people.
perfect. Thank you.
But yeah, one of them is playing with that perception using those unreliable senses. So it's kind of like sensory misdirection, which can add layers and tension. So if someone's really angry, they might misinterpret how other characters behave towards them. If they're really stressed because of some bad news, they might start seeing other things in a different way or hear them different. Kind of like if you're scared, then that coat rack might be something more sinister in the corner because of your character's emotional state. Number four is foreshadow with objects, not just words. So, foreshadow isn't just about dropping hints in dialogue or action or directly in the prose. Sometimes objects can tell their own story as well. So, something I love in books is when something was introduced at the beginning and that seemed innocuous, and then it's really important later in the story, and it was just kind of buried there. I love when that happens. So, the idea of maybe there's a rusty old key introduced in chapter one that turns out to be super important in chapter 19. So, you can kind of think of these as props that are hidden clues that can make your story feel much more rich and interconnected. And the last tip is to make every scene work over time. So, usually in a first draft, we often just have the scene do one thing because that's just where our brain is at in draft one. That's what revision is for. But it's not just there to move the plot along. So you want to make it multitask. So a good scene should advance the plot, develop a character, and maybe at the same time hint at a theme all at once or a motif. So it's like getting three for the price of one. And it keeps your story tight and meaningful without adding wasted space or extra words that are unnecessary. So those are my 5 tips. I'll turn it over to Jess so she can tell you a little bit about herself and her agenting work.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for being here. I didn't realize it's going to be such a big group. I've got like 25 people on this screen, and apparently there's 3 screens altogether. So there's like 50 people I'm not even seeing. Thank you so much for being here. And my name is Jess Trudel. I'm literary agent with the Rights Factory. I've been a literary agent for almost a year now. And I was an editorial assistant with the Rights Factory before they made me an agent. And as mentioned, I was a freelance editor prior to that. Um, I don't know if I was supposed to have prepared 5 tips for writers. Phew, okay. Thought maybe I missed an email. But yeah, I mostly at the moment represent children's literature, everything from board books through young adults. Although I am going to be representing adult titles for my existing clients, because I do want to branch out. But from a querying standpoint, I'm only open to children's literature. My like favorite genres are picture book through middle grade. Those are my favorite spaces. Um, and I would really love to find a great chapter book series. They're very hard to come by, very hard to nail those down. And yeah, what else would you want to know? There's so many of you. You must have 1,000 questions.
Okay, so anyone who has questions, you can raise your hand, you can type in the chat, you can just come off mute, but try not to do that when someone else is asking a question. We actually had a question in the community today that kind of might be right up your alley, and someone asked about what ages do you have for your protagonist in a children's chapter book versus a YA book, and how do you know what are the expectations there?
When you say chapter book, do you mean chapter book as in the like space between picture book and middle grade, or do you mean middle grade? Some people
Yeah.
refer to middle grade as chapter books.
So the very first one that when you're out of the picture books, you get there's actually chapters, and then you've got your middle grade, and then your young adult. What are the expected age ranges for those books?
Yeah, so chapter books, I mean, there's usually 5 to 8. It's very similar age group to picture books. It's just basically like upper picture book age group is essentially what you're looking at. It's the children that are just starting to be more independent as a reader. That's why they're very short. They're very fast paced. Very they're not simple language the way you see in early readers, which are meant as teaching tools to help people kids learn how to read. They're a very different specific thing, and that's why they're usually not accepted as submissions from publishers because they're usually developed in-house. But chapter books are just helping those older readers that are getting ready to enter the middle grade space transition out of picture books. So heavily illustrated, not too heavy on the text, fast paced, and yeah, geared towards that upper range of the picture book readers.
Okay.
So something to remember is that kids always read up generally. So, the protagonist of a middle grade book might be 8 to 12 years old, because 6 to 7, 8-year olds and so on are reading them.
Oh, okay.
We all took our big sisters or big brothers, Nancy Drews or Hardy Boys off the shelf when we were probably not the target age originally when those came out. Sneaking those and being like, no, I can read them.
Hmm.
And the same with YA. Like YA is, bordering 13's a bit on the young age, but going up to 16. But it's a lot of, 12, 13, 14, 15-year olds that are going to start reading those, until they reach adulthood and then start reading like the rest of us, everything.
Everything.
Um, yeah, exactly. Same with picture books, right? They've got their own age range. Parents are picking them up, for their kids.
Nice. And who doesn't want to read a book we're told we're not allowed to read yet? Of course, you want to read it. Okay, we're going to go to Linda's question next. She says, "What state of completion do you like to get your manuscript in? I like fully edited, just structurally edited, etc. What's your dream?"
I think that everybody should wait until they've done as much as they can on their own with their manuscript before they send it out to an agent or an editor. It's really important that you put in that effort. And I understand that everybody's level of ability is different, which is where beta readers and critique partners come in, because you don't know what you don't know. So if you try to edit entirely on your own, there's a good chance you're going to miss things that other people would pick up. So I really encourage every writer to go through multiple drafts on their own first, pick up what you can on your own, then have beta readers and critique partners look at it, catch what you missed, and then go back and edit it again before you try to submit to agents or editors. Because one of the problems that happens is that people write their first draft, they think it's amazing, and they submit it, and that adds to the workload that all agents and editors have, which creates a backlog in the industry, which creates these long wait times that writers are always complaining about, right? And that's the problem. You don't know what you don't know. You sent it out thinking it was amazing. I get it. You're not doing it maliciously or on purpose. So that's why it's really good to have this system in place where you go through multiple rounds of edits on your own. Whether or not you think it's amazing the first time doesn't matter. Put it away for a month, come back to it, read it again, edit it again, put it away for a month, come back to it, read it, edit it again, and then get somebody else to read it. And when you do get someone else to read it, make sure they read that genre. If
Mm.
you give that a middle grade manuscript to somebody who reads picture books, they're not going to be able to give you very valid advice, right? You need people that have experience in that genre, either writers in that genre or readers in that genre, preferably both, so that they can give you feedback that's relevant to what you wrote.
And I would also add, maybe choose people who will be honest with you. So if you need to pick me up, have mom read it, have your best friend read it. But if you need real feedback, then have someone else who's going to be comfortable being honest with you and say what's working and what's not working. because getting a whole bunch of "this is amazing" is not going to help. Um,
Yeah, so true. And then when we talk about kindness, we talk about giving real feedback in a kind manner, and so it's valuable to the writer, but not in a mean way. Okay, Mark, do you want to go? I'll go over to one live question or audio question if you want to go ahead, and then I'll go back to the chat questions.
Sure. I was actually listening to that chat question about the age. It wasn't so much about the character. It was more about the characters. What age should the character be if you want to cross over, say, from YA and include some adults? For example, Katniss Evergreen is appealing to both young adults and adults. And Ender's Game, you have somebody younger, but I think that also Ender was popular with a number of adults because of the story. So is it the story or is it the age of the character or both?
Yeah, the age of the
Um,
character is pretty important from a genre perspective. Um, Looking at past books that were published a long time ago isn't helpful for the current industry. Right now, characters that are in YA should be teenagers, 13 to 18, maybe 19 if they're still dealing with teenage issues, like they're still in high school, they're still all their friends are in high school, whatever it might be. 19 you can kind of push it to, as long but once they move on to college or once they move on to full-time work or whatever those adult concerns, you've moved out of the YA space, right? It's about what the character is dealing with at the right age. So 13 to 18 ideally for YA. Maybe you can push it to 19, and then middle grade characters are 8 years old to 12 years old. But eight is really kind of quite on the low side. Nine is probably better. And then for picture books, the characters are usually no more than 8 years old. But often in picture books, because you have so little space to work with, you don't usually say how old the character is anyway, unless you're specifically dealing with like a birthday or something where you have to say the age. Generally, it's more presented by the illustrator. They're presented as a certain age with a picture book as opposed to actually stated to be a certain age. And then chapter books, again, they're very similar in terms of the picture book age group, but on the older side. So they're usually the character will be 6 to 8 years old. And again, there's not often mentioned how old they are because, again, short space, not a lot of words, so there's not usually that much as much detail put into that kind of stuff. But if an age is mentioned, it'll be between 6 and 8 years old.
yeah, and what makes a story cross over with adults is that strong character who's just so interesting and full of depth and relatability, likability, growth, all those things that attract you to a character. And of course, the story itself having to be a good story. But that's where you might find some crossover with non YA readers who read YA. Sorry, YA readers who are not young adults. So adults reading that, it's what grabs you in terms of the character. Katniss was such an interesting character. Um, being very strong, being the protector of the family, being a female character at the time that was also quite strong, that we were not always seeing in books published around that time. Very independent, not dependent on a boy, as you often see in YA, where they throw everything out because there's a cute boy. So there's all these different facets of a book that make it crossover.
Yeah, crossover appeal
mhm.
very often involves having an adult character and a teenage character or child character as main characters in the story. That's where a lot of crossover appeal comes from, but also what Christina said about the teenager being highly independent and dealing with adult problems. Like Katniss is going into an arena to fight for her life. That's not something a teenager typically has to deal with. So that gives it a appeal to adults, right? So that's what really creates that crossover appeal, is having teenagers that are dealing with adult issues or teenagers and children that are only partially narrating or observing the story. Or of course, if the situations being dealt with are highly mature, too mature for a child audience, but the character is still a child, then there would be crossover appeal. It would be probably marketed in that case as an adult, as a book for adults, not for kids.
Hey. Thank you. So we've got a lot of middle grade authors in our community, and I think Allison's question is going to resonate with a lot of them. And it's, what's your take on selling middle grade right now? I'm a little disheartened with the prospect of debuting in that space.
Yes. So middle grade is going through a phase. Um, Part of it is Barnes and Noble taking books off the shelf and not really promoting them as much. And as a result, when books don't sell well, then editors don't buy as many. And it's just this, unending kind of cycle of the book isn't selling well, so they don't buy more. And since they don't buy more, there's no books to sell and whatnot, right? So it's going through a phase and it is very difficult right now. Genre middle grade is still doing pretty well, like fantasy middle grade, horror middle grade. Like if it fits neatly into a genre like that, it's doing pretty well. Contemporary middle grade is very hard, needs a very strong hook. But the same goes for YA contemporary, also, needs a really strong hook. So yes, it is going through a phase, but the good news is that everything in publishing is cyclical. Everything in publishing eventually comes back around. And the great thing is you never know when that moment's going to come. So you could be the one who's submitting at just the right time when it's coming back around. So that's why you should never give up on the genre, even if it's struggling, because it will always come back around. Eventually, it'll come back around, and you want to be that person who's right on the cusp of that before it gets old again.
Okay, then we have Jyoti. I know there are many elements to a good query, but what is something key that makes you want to read the whole query and pique your interest in a book? Is it a synopsis? How critical are comparisons? Will they make or break a query? Thank you.
Okay, so whenever I answer this question, because I get this question a lot, I'm always afraid I'm going to piss off a whole lot of writers because I don't read your whole query letter, not right away anyway. I scan it super fast for the details like age group, genre, uh, word count, things like that that let me know whether or not it's even something I could potentially represent. And then I really quickly scan the pitch paragraph, and then I just move on to the sample because what ultimately comes down to is can I read a whole book in your style of writing? If we don't match stylistically, then I'm not going to be able to read this book 6 times with you as we go through edits, right? Like I need to be super into the style and the flow and how it reads. So I don't spend a lot of time on the query letter until I know that I'm into the the sample. Then I go back to the query letter and then I read it in more detail to find out more about how the story develops, the plot line, and all of that, so I can decide if I want to ask for more pages. So I don't read your query letter necessarily in full. Like if I scan and I see that it's not in a genre I'm going to represent, then I'm just going to decline because there's no point in even continuing. And then if I read the sample and I'm just like, no, I just can't get into it, then I'm going to end up probably declining before I've read your query letter. But then if I'm really into the sample, I'll have read your whole query letter and then I'll either be declining or requesting the full. So I hope that doesn't piss anybody off, but I kind of skip the query letter at first until I read the sample.
And do
Yeah.
you ever, if you read something and so it's not a genre you like, do you ever think, oh, but this other agent might like it and pass it on? Does that
Oh
happen?
yeah, I've referred many manuscripts to coworkers, and I've had many refer to me as well. Definitely, if I read something, I'm just like these have so and so's vibes all over it. Then I'll reach out to them and be like, hey, does this sound cool to you? And they're like, yeah, that does sound like me. And then I'll either request, like I'll ask the author if they're interested in having it referred, or if it's in Query Manager, it's a very easy click to send it to the other agent. So I might just quickly send it so they can look at it.
Nice. Okay, you've kind of answered this next question, but I'm going to throw it out there anyway, just so it doesn't get missed. It's from Rob, and he says, writers often hear, sorry, it's tough to sell that particular genre right now. Other than scrolling through Amazon Goodreads to see what's missing, where do we learn what's passe?
Oh, see, that's a hard one. You shouldn't be writing to trends. You shouldn't base what you're writing on by what you think you can sell. Just because I mean, writing is already hard enough work. If you're gonna try to write something just because it's popular right now, by the time you finish writing it, it might not be popular anymore. So you put in all that effort trying to write something that's perfect for right now, but by the time you query it, it's not popular anymore, or by the time it's being submitted, it's not popular anymore, or by the time it's going to be published, it's not popular anymore. So it's just the industry, everything takes so long that writing to trends just doesn't make sense to do. Obviously, there are things that do fall by the wayside and in a more permanent way, like word count lengths have changed, age groups for certain categories have changed, genre expectations change, things like that. Like those kinds of rules you should definitely follow. Like if it says, these days, middle grade books shouldn't be more than 50,000 words, you know, follow that rule, right? Because if you're a debut author, the chances of somebody letting you break the rules is much less likely than if you're an established author with a following and people that are going to buy your book no matter how long it is, right? So, like, follow the rules when it comes to those kinds of changes in the industry, but not when it comes to what's popular, what genre is popular, what style is popular, things like that. Don't try and write to trends because you don't want to make yourself miserable. Writing is so much work. You want to keep it fun, right? So make sure you write something you're passionate about, regardless of what the trend might be, and just make sure that when you edit it, you make sure that it follows those rules.
And
Now I have
sometimes,
to ask sorry, go ahead, Christina.
as you say, sometimes writers don't realize that their emotions actually come through in what they're writing. So if you're miserable and you hate what you're doing, we can tell. We can tell when we read something that your heart's not in it. There's no love and care into that story. It can be felt. It's kind of like when you go on someone's webpage for business and they wrote it when they were angry. You can tell that that particular newsletter was angry. It's the same with writing a book. You can tell when someone doesn't love their character, doesn't love the story that they're telling. So, like Jess said, write what you love, write what you're passionate about, write what lights you up and makes you happy, because that comes through on the page.
Can you write when you're angry if you're writing an angry character?
Oh, for sure.
Absolutely.
Okay, good. Just
Absolutely
checking.
should.
That's when you write that one. Okay, got it.
No
I
tears in the
just
writer, no tears in the character.
just want to follow up on that where you're talking about, follow the rules. So where do people find these rules? That's got to be the next. Where do you go looking for them?
There's great resources all over the internet, depending on what genre you write in and that sort of thing. Like SCBWI has a lot of great resources. If you write in the children's book space, there's all kinds of different groups designed for different genres and different people. So definitely seek out those types of resources that are specific to your genre, specific to your age group, and so on. Visit publishing websites. Like if you go to, Penguin Random House or Macmillan or any of those websites for major publishers, they have the categories usually delineated there. Sometimes it even says the age groups and everything. Like it'll say, looking for books for ages 9 to 12, and then you're like, oh, okay, well that explains a lot about middle grade to me right there. So like that kind of stuff can be really helpful too. And then of course have a community of writers. Like that's hugely important. Like having, because you can't do all the research on your own, and and the rules do change over time. So having a lot of other people around you that are also doing the research so you guys can crowdsource ideas and information, that's hugely important.
I would
Nice.
say
And look at we're a community.
I'd say like read a lot in your genre. Like if you read a lot of mysteries, you'll notice the five scenes that are almost obligatory in every mystery. There's got to be the crime that happens or the discovery of the crime. Like you need to find a body if it's a murder mystery. You're going to need to do, interview witnesses. You're going to need to follow clues. You're going to need to have that big reveal. Almost that classic, Sherlock Holmes in front of the fireplace with everyone sitting in front of him and he reveals who the murderer is. That moment is going to have to happen in the book. And those are rules, right? Those are those obligatory scenes you must have in a mystery. And it's the same for fantasy, for romance. Romance, you need a meet cute. You need to have a fight between the people where we never think they could possibly get over their issues and find each other again. We need to have the happily ever ending, whatever that looks like. Um, this is my cat who loves being on Zoom. I love him, but I don't love him on Zoom. But yeah, so even if you just read like 10 books in your genre, you could probably figure out what some of those main requirements are for that type.
Preferably recent books.
Yeah.
If you read Sherlock Holmes and use that as an example, you might not follow the rules. But
Yes, repeat
older books
books.
do, like, tropes are based off of writing through history. So reading old books is great too. But I just mean make sure you also read recent books as well so you can see how things have changed over time.
Nice. Okay, we're going to change direction here a little bit from Jacqueline. I've heard conflicting information about where to put the comp titles in your query letter. Some say right at the beginning, others say later on. Is there a standard for this now, or is it subjective with each agent?
Yeah, there's absolutely no standard for how you should go about doing this. I know that if you have really great comps and you're flash them right up at the top to get someone's attention, then that's great, right? But it doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to get their attention with the rest of your query letter. So there really is no standard. Don't have any particular preference. Most of the time, I don't even notice when somebody doesn't include comp titles in the query letter, because when it comes time, if I decide I like this book and I want to represent you and I want to submit it, I'm going to come up with comps anyway. So it doesn't, for me, having comp titles doesn't make a difference to me. But I know a lot of agents say that they do care about that. Maybe I'm just too new that I don't care yet, but it really doesn't matter that much to me. But there is absolutely no standard for it.
Okay, so that kind of talks about Todd's questions. What if you cannot, and I mean cannot, comp your book? As in, I threw it to a webinar of industry experts, and even they couldn't come up with a comp for it. Will something simply not sell if it has no comps in the marketplace?
I could not possibly answer that question for you. It all comes down to the manuscript. Like, can this sell? I don't know until I read the book.
Right.
Um, there's certain things that I can tell you that right now that I can't sell. Like if, you're a middle-aged white male and you wrote a book about a female teenager getting raped, then yeah, I probably can't sell it. But that's for other reasons, icky reasons that we don't need to talk about, right? Those are kinds of things that I can say absolutely no to right off the bat. But like comps, no, that's not. It's not an important enough factor until I've read the book.
Yeah,
Oh,
and if you can't find comps that are close to your book, sometimes what you can do, which I've done with my agent on other books, is choose an element of a book. So you might say, like, I'm totally making this up off the top of my head, but like with the friendship from Harry Potter and the violence of Game of Thrones and fish, that's what my book is like. Game of Thrones with fish and the friendship of Harry Potter. So you're taking pieces of these different books that you think represent your book, kind of like a soup. We took carrots from here and celery from there, and that's what my book is. So that can sometimes help when there is no real comp to your book,
Yes.
because you want to be able to show the agent that one, your book fits somewhere in the book world. Like, where could that be imagined on the shelf? And where in the conversation of books are you adding to? So if all of this was contemporary YA, where do you fit and what are you adding that's different from every other YA contemporary out there? What are you adding to that conversation?
nice. That's a hard question. Okay, Mary Jo says, do you rep graphic novels for kids? And if so, what interests you in that space?
I do, although I don't have one yet. I would really love to have a graphic novel. Um, I realized actually only very recently that I was closed to high fantasy and hard sci-fi novels, but in a graphic novel, I would probably be okay with that. Because for me, high fantasy and hard sci-fi are like hard because they're the high word count, and I'm not a fast reader. So the idea of reading, 100,000 words 6 times in a row to edit is just like overwhelming to me. But in a graphic novel form, I probably actually really like it. And I do. One of my favorite graphic novel series is by Molly Ostertag, the Witch Boy series. Like things like that would be really interesting to me. A contemporary graphic novel series would be really great as well, because even though YA and middle grade contemporary are struggling, in the graphic novel space is not struggling quite as much, because like just what Christina just said, bringing something new to the table of what's in that contemporary space, right? It's making it more visual, making it more colorful, and giving it more appeal. So yeah, I think for the graphic novel space, I would be really interested in seeing some interesting contemporary stories, as well as some fantasy and sci-fi. Not horror. I'm not a horror person. Sorry.
That's okay. You can't love everything. Patty says, since chapter books are usually developed in-house, how hard might it be for me as a debut author to pitch my chapter books to an agent?
I missed the beginning of that. Can you say that again?
Since chapter books are usually developed in-house, how hard might it be for me as a debut author to pitch my chapter books to an agent?
Chapter books are not normally developed in-house. It's early readers that are normally developed in-house. So early readers are those like I can read books where it's very, very little text, very repetitive phrases that are designed specifically to help readers um, learn how to read. That's what an early reader is, and those are almost always developed in-house. They're usually like work for hire sort of situations. Chapter books are different. Chapter books are sometimes developed in house, because they are so high concept that sometimes a publisher is like, I like an editor that works there is like, I have this amazing concept for a chapter book and I need someone to write it. So they'll do work for hire to develop it, because they know what they want. And it's very, if you, with high concept books, it's like in a few words, you can get across what that book's about, and everyone's like, oh, right, like that's what a high concept book is. So if an editor at a publishing house is like trying to find a chapter book series that they want and they're just not getting it, then they might decide to develop it in house. But I wouldn't say that they normally do that. It's something that has happened and does happen, but I wouldn't say they always do that. And I would say that more often than not, they might develop it with an author already on their roster, right? They might be, they've published 3 or 4 books with this X author, and they have this concept that they really want to develop, and like they'll work with that author to help them write it and develop it. So yeah, I wouldn't say chapter books are usually developed in-house. You could definitely pitch chapter books to agents that are open to it. Not all are open to chapter books, and that's partially because I think a lot of agents don't read chapter books. They're, like I said, a very specific thing. I love them personally, but I can't say that I know a lot of other agents that read them as much as I might. Like I've read the entire Ivy and Bean series. You know what I mean? I can't say that I know any other agents that have done that. There probably are, but I can't say that I've ever like met one where they were like, yeah, I love that series too. Right. So I think some of it comes down to just like a knowledge of that genre and understanding of it. Um, and they are a bit hard to sell in the sense that it kind of falls in that between space, where it's heavily illustrated but not entirely illustrated. So it's like it's hard to be like, I'm going to sell this as text only, or I'm going to do author illustrator. Like it's really hard to figure out the perfect mix. So I think that's why it can feel like it's really hard to find an agent who's open to it, and then an agent being able to sell it, because it is that kind of in between space. But yeah, you definitely can absolutely pitch a chapter book to agents that are open to it.
And just to clarify, Jess mentioned earlier that chapter books that are meant to teach children to read, those are the ones that are usually developed in-house, as opposed to just a chapter book with a fun story. Just because you would need an expert in, reading issues, learning disabilities, that kind of stuff to help develop a book to teach children to read.
Yeah. And I would say that, like, when I see queries in my inbox, a chapter book query is the thing that gets me most excited. Like, I see chapter book and I'm like, ooh. And like almost every time it has the exact same problem in every manuscript that I receive, and that's the pace. It's very hard to nail down the pace of a chapter book. It's very short, like 5,000 to 8,000 words, and your chapters are a few pages each, and there has to be a major plot point in every chapter. It's extremely hard to nail down that pace. And that's like 99% of the time the problem with every chapter book manuscript I get. I'm always excited to read them. I'm always like, yes, because I really want to represent a really amazing chapter book series. But it's hard to get it just right. And I'm telling you, it's the pace. It's hard, but you gotta nail that pace. It's supposed to be very action oriented, fast paced. That's the entire point, because you're trying to get readers who are used to picture books, very illustration based, very little text, to transition into middle grade where there's usually no illustrations and a lot of text. So the whole point of that chapter book is to make them super interested in reading it so they don't realize that they're reading more words. That's the whole point. So you really have to nail down that pace and that high interest, high concept.
That is fantastic advice. Alrighty, Steve says, how easy is it to pitch controversial political subjects in YA? I have a story set in Louise Mitchell's School for Anarchists in London in 1890. Sharp intake of breath from a couple of librarians.
I don't have a lot of experience with historical fiction, so I can't speak too much to this. So you can strike that one as well. Horror, historical fiction, not really high on my list. I can say that um, if you have something that's timely, even if it's set in the past, if you can make it relevant to today, that's going to help you sell it. Controversy and all that, I don't think necessarily is a factor, as long as it's handled with care and authenticity. And so I think you can definitely um, pitch something that's controversial as long as you handle it in the right way. But as far as that particular setting with the historical, I mean, I can't really speak to that because of my lack of experience with that genre.
Fair enough. That's all
Right.
good.
Just for information, Louise Michel was a French anarchist and got a mention at the Paris Olympics. If you watch the opening ceremony, she was one of the heroines that was mentioned there. And she ran a school in London, supported by William Morris as the designer and other people for anarchists and radicals, that ran for a year. So I thought an interesting setting for a YA book.
No, absolutely. I mean, I would read that. And like just said, as long as you treat it with respect for all the groups involved, for that authenticity, all of that is fine. Controversy is okay.
I want to very specifically add, though, while I say authenticity, I don't mean that I want people to be screaming, but historical accuracy, when there's no racism or like rampant sexual misconduct and whatnot. Like, it's okay to like, that's why I say handle it with care, is that like, you don't, just because it's historically accurate doesn't mean that you have to like include all of the gory details of how life really was back then, especially in a YA or middle grade sort of situation.
Right, thank you.
Alrighty. Brandy says, what if your genre is very niche, a combination between genres? How do you market those agents or in self-publishing?
Sorry, I have ADHD and I have the chat open. I need to close it. Say that question again. I'm closing the
What
chat.
if
I
your
can't.
genre is, sorry, what if your genre is very niche, a combination between genres? And I know, Brandy, I can guess what genres they are. How do you market those to agents or in self-publishing?
So like it's like a genre blend, like sci-fi meets fantasy. Is that what we're talking about? Or
So horror meets sci-fi meets fantasy meets crime thriller.
right,
You
okay. Um yeah, so the important thing when you have something like that is that you have to pick a genre in terms of what shelf it's going to sit on a bookstore. Practically speaking, what shelf is it going to be on? That's what we ultimately need to know, because at the end of the day, doesn't matter how many genres you throw in there, your book can only be in one place in the bookstore. So you have to pick a genre, and then you can say with elements of this, right? So you might decide to lean into the sci-fi. It's like, okay, it's a space odyssey with elements of a crime mystery thriller, right? So that's ultimately the most important thing, is that we have to know how to market this. How are we selling it? I have to know who I'm sending it to. As an agent, I've got to send it to editors, and there's some editors that will accept sci-fi and won't accept horror, right? So which one am I submitting to? So that's what it ultimately comes down to. You have to pick your market, and we're going to stick to that, unless of course it's not working and we want to pivot and we want to change up the pitch. That's a great thing about a genre blended story, is that we could technically pitch it in an entirely different way without actually changing the manuscript, and we might still be able to sell it to a completely different person. So that's kind of the cool thing. But when you're pitching it to agents, you have to pick a genre so that we can decide. And we might disagree with you, and we might read it and go like, actually, I think I could sell this better as a horror. That might be the case. But you, like, if you're just submitting and saying, I've written a sci-fi, fantasy, horror, thriller, we're going to be like, this person doesn't know anything about publishing, and I don't think I have time to teach them. Right. So when you're querying, make sure you pick one, be as clear as you can. But at the end of the day, maybe your agent's going to decide differently and go with a different pitch for it. That's okay. Just be really clear in your query so that you're not confusing them or giving them reasons to be like, yeah, I don't have time to teach this person about how the industry works.
Yeah, just choose the dominant genre. Like, what element is it the most of? Like, right now, my current novel is a detective noir mystery with magic, like magic realism and a retelling of a fairy tale, right? So it's being pitched as a detective noir mystery. And then we mentioned that there's these other things.
Yeah, those other things become the thing that makes your story unique in that genre.
Fantastic. I want to read that. So we're going to go in a little bit different direction. Jyoti, we have lots of people who write series in this community. So this is a great question. What tips do you have for authors who are querying the first book in a series?
Always pitch your book as a standalone with series potential. Always. Because I cannot guarantee you will ever sell another book in this series. I just can't. I can't even guarantee you I'm going to sell this book. I'm going to try, but I can't guarantee it. So ultimately, your book has to be able to stand alone, because there's just no guarantees that you'll ever be able to continue this series. So think of it, I like to use a Hunger Games as an example. In that book, the first games end. We know how they ended, but we also know that Snow is still out there, and he's still in charge of the world, right? So we know there's more out there to explore, there's more to do and see, but the actual story we are dealing with in this first book is over. They did not die. They both made it back alive, right? I'm sure they made changes at the end of the book to make it open for the next sequel if it was originally not pitched as a series. I have no idea how it was originally pitched, but you can always change the ending of a story if you secure a publishing contract that's for 2 or 3 books. You can always change the ending to make it more open, but you should write the story as a standalone right now and edit it later if you manage to get that book deal.
Do not end it with a cliffhanger, in other words, because if it were to be published with that cliffhanger and the book sales were not good, which means they didn't ask for a second book, you will have angered a lot of readers who had an ending that felt unsatisfying. We've all been there. George Martin just saying you could write your books faster. Um, just putting that out there in the universe. So it's very disappointing for readers wanting to find another one, and then they just get angry at the author, because it's not the reader's job to understand publishing and marketing and all that fun stuff. They'll just say, well, I'm never reading another one by, Bob Smith. Hopefully there's no Bob Smith in the chat. Your books are
Bob.
lovely if you're
Not you, Bob. The other one.
Never, Bob. Okay, Suzanne says, I'm looking for suggestions on how to handle cop titles. She writes middle grade. What type of comparisons do you find are most effective? Also, I've recently heard agents are looking for comp titles that have been published in the last 3 years.
Yeah, so
I'm going to just say you already answered the first part, so you don't need to answer that for me again. But the second part, I am curious about.
Okay. So I'm actually doing an entire talk on Wednesday about comp titles. Somebody hired me to just focus on that one topic, because I used to do a comp title curation service before I became an agent, where I would send you 10 titles that are potential comps for your story, and then you read them and decide which ones you think are actual comps. So I use like various softwares and things to help me find comp titles. As an agent, that's extremely important for me to be able to find those comp titles. Um, so the second part of the question, tell me what the second part of the question is, so I can answer that specifically.
Oh, okay. I recently heard agents are looking for comp titles that have been published in the last 3 years.
Okay, yes. So I would say, first of all, we get a lot of conflicting information. I say we because I used to be on the writer side of the querying trenches, so I understand exactly where you're coming from. And the information I got as a writer completely contradicts what agents actually say about comp titles, which is you can use a blockbuster, you can use older titles, you can do a lot of things with comp titles that they seem to say you can't when you're like doing workshops and stuff on the topic. But the important thing is that you temper those things with something new and recent, right? So you might say, this comps to, I'll say the Hunger Games because we mentioned it, but let's say the Hunger Games, which is older, and then also a recent published title. I would say that is a good strategy. I still wouldn't say anybody should, comp to Harry Potter or any of those, big names. You probably shouldn't comp to the Hunger Games either because it's so big. Like, I mean, there is some household names that maybe aren't um, a good idea to comp with, just because the problem is everybody uses these comp titles. So once you start seeing those comp titles over and over again, you're like, oh, another one who thinks the Hunger Games. The most important thing about a comp title is that it's accurate. If you comp to something and I can't see why you comp to it, then it just looks like you threw that in there to get my attention. And then it feels disingenuous, and then the trust is not there, and you need to have trust with your agent, between author and agent, right? So the most important thing is that it makes sense. That comp title should be a good fit. So it can be old, it can be a blockbuster, but if you're going to use one of those, it's got to be because it's the perfect comp for your book. Otherwise, use recent titles. 3 to 5 years, yes, ideally.
You can also use a TV show, a movie in addition to books. You don't
Yes.
have to be limited to only books. It shouldn't be only movies, but you can, in fact, use TV shows and movies or a very famous play, something that the agent would recognize. You don't want anything that's too obscure that they've got to Google and study and research to know what that is.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, we got 2 minutes left. I'm going to throw out one more question before we close out, and it's from Barb, and it said, would an agent ever ask for the second book in a series if you like the first book proposal?
Well, I'm a little bit different because I actually ask for other pitches in my query manager. So you pitch me in your query letter one manuscript, and then there's like bonus pitches at the bottom so that I can kind of see if your body of work is of interest to me. Because you might pitch a book and it's something that isn't really going to sell right now. But then you have other titles down there that are like really interesting to me. So I might request one of the other bonus titles, knowing that maybe the thing you pitched to me would be hard to sell right now, but in a couple of years, maybe not. Right. So it's about being interested in your body of work for me, because I want to work with people long term. So I'm not just interested in what you have ready to go right now. I want to know what we're going to be pitching next year, the year after that, the year after that.
What I would add from my own agent and my experience, because I write series, is that generally they don't want to see the second book until the first one has sold, because there may be so many changes that happen to that first one by the time it gets to that bookstore shelf. The publishing house might want to make some changes that if you've written the second book, you may have to rewrite the whole thing for it to now be continuous from that first book. So usually they want to, my experience has been usually my agent wants to work with the first book. Let's make it solid. Let's get a 2-book deal. And then you can, once we've sold it and it's perfect and it's going out there, then you can start on the second book. In the meantime, write something else, is usually what she tells me.
Yeah,
No
I was
pressure there.
operating under the assumption the second book was already written in this case, but if you haven't already written the other books in the series, don't do it until you actually sell the first one. Don't waste your time and energy. Work on other things. There's other things you can work on in the meantime. You don't need to write that other book. Write the synopsis, write the pitch maybe, but you don't need to write the book. Just wait.
Yep. Keep your notes, keep your ideas, keep plugging at certain things, but focus on something else that your agent can put out there on submission while we're waiting for book one to sell.
Right.
Wow, so that was fantastic. Uh, First of all, well, thank you to both of you for being here and giving us such incredible information. And thank you to everybody in the audience who asked such fantastic questions. We covered a lot of topics. I just put up in the chat, and I'll do it again because it's going by so quickly. Don't forget about the conference next week. Christina, give us one little shout out about the conference before we head off.
Oh my God, please join. It is free. Originally we had 19 experts, but I've been able to squeeze in an extra bonus 2 people. So I get 21 experts, 21 sessions. It's a mixture of workshops, masterclasses, interviews, and we capture everything from character essentials to the power of point of view, which is something that Fictionary is helping, as well as structuring your book. So they're doing 2 sessions. But we also have sessions on how to create your secondary cast, how to make sure those supporting characters are just as strong as your main character. We have things on the foundation work before you write a novel so that you have more success and less frustration as you write your book. So there's a little bit of everything for everyone, whether you're a new author, an experienced author, somewhere in between. There's a session for you. They're all pre-recorded. You can watch on your own time. So hopefully you'll join. And if I'm going to plug Jess again because she's so amazing. If you'd like to work with Jess on your novel, she is starting, I believe, October 9 is the start date for Jess's session. So you can go and register for that right now on our website.
I love working with authors. I love helping people. Editing is like I love editing more than I love writing, which is kind of, I think, why I love agenting so much, because I can now not have to write quite as much. It's a lot of work. I don't know how you guys do it.
All right, fantastic. Well, thank you, everybody. Super as usual. And we'll see you all at the conference next week.
Thank you so much for having us.
Bye.